Well, hey guys, and welcome back. We are finishing up our section in chapter 2 today, looking at the roles of men and women in the church and how they can uniquely, as men and as women, keep the church aimed at love. We saw last time that men are called to step up into roles of leadership and authority in the church, and women are supposed to find ways to submit and to learn and to offer even input on how things are supposed to go as far as leadership in the church. And I think these are really powerful passages and something that reminds us of how God designed the church and how he set things up for his body to be functioning and to stay aimed at love. And so we're going to finish up this section today. We're going to see the ways that Paul actually draws on some earlier scriptures to unpack what it is that he thinks is the design of God as far as men and women in the church. And so start with me in verse 13 of chapter 2. He says, "For Adam was formed first, then Eve. And Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor. Yet she will be saved through childbearing, if they continue in the faith and love and holiness with self-control." And what Paul has in mind here is the creation narrative all the way back in Genesis. And you can go through and read the creation narrative in Genesis. And you can start in chapter 1 and see all of those things. But what he has in mind here is what we see in chapter 2 and the relationship between Adam and Eve. And then in chapter 3, the fall, where Eve actually takes the fruit from the serpent and is deceived. And I think what Paul is getting at here, where he's saying that Adam is created first and then Eve, is he's saying that God actually has a design for men and for women. He has a design for men to step up in leadership from the very beginning of creation. This isn't something he's making up for the church to kind of figure out how it works. It goes all the way back to the very start of creation. And so men are to step into that role. And when they fail to do that, as Adam did in the garden, then what that means is that we're putting women in vulnerable positions where they can be deceived. And that's a failure of men to step into the role that God has called them to. And for women, when they're in a vulnerable position like this, that's partly on the fault of the man, but it's also something that women need to take personal responsibility for. And so men and women are both guilty in the fall, both guilty in Genesis chapter 3 of sin. And what we see in chapter 3 is God's response to the fall, both to Adam and to Eve, is to give them a burden. Men have a burden to work and to work hard, and for it to be exhausting, and it has a burden on them. And women are given a burden of pain through childbirth. And this is one of the things that Paul unpacks here. He says, yet she will be saved through childbearing if they continue in the faith and love and holiness with self-control. And there's a couple different interpretations of this, of what Paul is doing in this reference to childbearing. The first is that maybe he's trying to say that women will have to endure the pain of childbearing, but that won't be the defining factor in who they are. That sin doesn't define who they are because of what Christ has done, that they've actually been redeemed. And so it's not through as in a method by which they're going to be redeemed, but it's that they're going to be redeemed in spite of the pain that they experience because of Eve's sin. And the second interpretation is actually that redemption itself in the person of Jesus came through his mother Mary in childbearing. Those are two different interpretations, and I think whichever one is more convincing to you, what we can pull away from this is that though we sin and feel the consequences of sin as men and as women, that's not the defining factor in our lives. Instead, it's the redemption that comes through Jesus and his blood poured out for sinners, both men and women. And so we need to keep that focus about us. And he says we need to continue in faith and love and holiness with self-control. And sometimes we can get hung up on what these verses are saying about men and women. and the implications of what these verses mean for us in the church. And yet what Paul is saying here, he ends this section of saying, when we step into our role as men to take ownership and leadership in the church, and when we take responsibility as women for stepping into a role of submission and supporting elders and pastors and leaders and those men that are in those roles, then what we're doing is actually keeping our eyes set and keeping our focus on love in the church. And so I hope this is encouraging for you as young men that are looking to step up into leadership that God's called you to. And I hope this is encouraging for you as young women that are trying to figure out their role and function in the church. And for both men and women, I think it's important that we continue in faith and love and holiness with self-control. And that keeps us focused and aimed at love.